Hello, dear friends. Today is August 29, Friday, and I want to tell you about the situation in Washington and Colombia. The aggression is growing, the tension is growing. In connection with that pause, one could say a pupicum, which emerged in relation to what to do next, in terms of regulating or stopping Russian aggression against Ukraine. We are waiting for Trump's statement. Another statement was announced today, the representative of the White House, Carl Lutz, speaking in the initial briefing. At the moment, it has become evidently Trump's inability to perceive reality, which is very simple. It is already clear to almost every little competent official in Washington. What it means is that Putin only understands strength and nothing more. So, as I told you in the previous video, the strategic bet of Trump that he already has a very good relationship with Putin and that everyone will be even better, everyone will be happy, it is simply fundamental. Moreover, it is deliberate. One could sit peacefully and not pay attention to it, but it is deliberate because it leads to situations that are beneficial only to the Kremlin, only to Moscow, allowing it to do what constitutes its strategic plan, its strategic goal. Recently, I listened to an interview of one of the leading researchers at the Washington Institute for the Researching of War, which almost everyone knows and which heads the four-star General Kin. He's George Barros. He's the director of the Ukrainian program, and it's hard to find a better analyst than him, at least in the open information space, discussing events on the battlefield. So he began the interview, and when they asked him what was happening in Ukraine, he said, "I'm lacking censor words. I'm saying now I'll make inhuman efforts to translate everything I want to say into diplomatic language," and then he managed. These are resistant people briefing the largest branches of the Ministry of Defense, even the State Department, and they are in such despondence over what's happening. General Kin 2 times in the past 2 days put in place the representative of the White House, the blonde Carol Hewitt, and to her face, essentially the White House. That has never happened before. I could never imagine something like this ever happening to me because General Kin is a tough Republican, loyal to this party and to this party's course. But he is part of the Reaganist category, people sometimes called neocon. He was. Just as before the Verkhovna meeting in Alaska, he was sure Trump would come and rub Putin on the table, since he has such strong positions. He was sure everything would be fine. Now he is annoyed, and General has never seen this state before. This blonde was different twice in the last 2 days. The first time the orcs bombed Ukraine, she expressed her opinion, including that of the president, that both sides were to blame. So she publicly lost the game Trump himself would have played. His reproach for Ukraine was that Zelensky and generally Ukraine must understand that Russia is 15 times greater than Ukraine, so resisting is useless. And there was only one way out. If resisting doesn't make sense, you have to surrender. Apparently, that's his plan, to force Ukraine to surrender at the first hour of Russian aggression. When he keeps repeating, "I would have been president," this war wouldn't have happened, right? No, because he would have come to Ukraine and not given any weapons to defend itself. Given that this Ukrainian weapon would have taken several hours of resistance, all of Putin's plans probably would have come true quickly, without any war. But she received resistance. There was general indignation. How can a White House not understand the difference between aggressor and victim? And now this blonde made another statement, softening, emphasizing that we understand there's an aggressor, there is a victim of aggression, but Russia is. She was referring to that barbarian bombing on Thursday. Russia did it in response to the shelling of Ukraine with oil refining facilities in Russia. That's the facilities that produce fuel for military personnel to continue aggression. Also for exports, so they can get money for making new weapons for aggression. So it's clear it's absurd, but she said significantly, "You probably know that Ukraine destroyed up to 20% of Russia's oil refining capabilities. But that should have been undermined. From their point of view, Russia probably had the legal, moral right to shelling cities and residential areas in Ukraine and killing civilians." When King asked for it, the leading Fox channel asked for it. You know the Fox channel, supposedly a trumpet channel. She asked, "What's happening, General? This is madness, considering the absurd position of the White House." To what the general really said, apparently they don't understand the difference between a victim of aggression and an aggressor. Do you understand what I'm talking about? Russia cannot lead, it cannot win a battlefield. In the past 2 years, Putin's orcs have advanced by 1% into Ukraine's depths. This is a complete failure of the army that it called its second army in the world. And what are the orcs doing in this situation? Their main goal is cities and a peaceful population, they being incapable of truly completing effective tasks on the battlefield are starting to hit cities and the peaceful population. That's barbarism, of course, and General Kin says we need to end this. And we can end this, but we don't need to act like a fool, we need to stop Putin. And only two things this economic sanctions know: a massive arms supply to Ukraine, and Ukraine will do. The host agreed to this conclusion and the question, and I want to emphasize, those people who, previously by heart, were like the Republican couple against the Russian party, agitated and supported him, have now become sharp criticism. But this is still happening against the backdrop of bold statements from Moscow. Today, the following came from Zakharova: neutral ratification, non-proliferation, Ukraine's nuclear status recognition of territorial realities and all the rest. Here's the garbage that Putin announced on February 24, 2022, when he announced the start of aggression against Ukraine. So Russia, while in the White House, something else is flaring up. That poor, unsuccessful blonde girl, greener response to these questions is flaring up to prove Trump has achieved some breakthroughs in Alaska, then in Washington. This is a large-scale conference with the participation of European leaders and Zelensky. Here, I would say, with a hint of Moscow, with a hint of taste, with a hint of enjoyment, a ringing head start. The administration, I would say, let's not get into internal politics, it's a separate matter, but the entire external political course of this administration. Russians bow down and do it in a particularly twisted form, and somewhere this is understood in the White House, around the White House, service, propaganda. Information, something happened and they start looking for the culprit, but what happened, and the shots get more and more directed at the most reliable diplomatician, Trump, Steve Witkoff. The article New York Post read this. Its goal was to show what happened, the failure it caused, and who is to blame. The article explains the beginning of the failure happened when Trump hurried to meet with Putin after the special ambassador, Witkoff, stated that the deal between Ukraine and Russia under Trump's command was close, and Trump quickly went to meet with Putin's Russian leader in Alaska at the beginning of this month. After the meeting, Witkoff was reassured that Moscow was ready to strike a deal to end the war with Ukraine. This is a large-scale investigation carried out by the New York Post, one of the closest newspapers in the U.S. administration, part of the same empire, along with Fox News. We've talked about this over several videos, but for the New York Post, this is a discovery they've been waiting for. They aren't fully completing what they're working on, as they try to transfer all of this to Witkoff. Otherwise, what happened from the beginning of August of this year was a brilliant, very successful operation, or an active event, or whatever you call it, by the Kremlin. As a result, they basically put Trump in a corner once again, and now it's very difficult for him to leave. Look what briefly happened. Remember, at the beginning of this month, what we all waited for, August 8, when the term of Trump's destructive ultimatum expires, according to which, if Putin does not agree to a ceasefire, then the sanctions would be horrific, 500% or 200%, in any case horrific, devastating, and Russia would not survive. The days are approaching, August 8 is approaching, and from Moscow to the Kremlin, no signs that Putin will agree to it. And then danger arises. You can feel the alarm in the Columbia district. Then it would work if Putin doesn't agree. Trump must announce sanctions. He has a good relationship with Putin, which implies that Trump probably doesn't want to announce these sanctions. If he doesn't announce these sanctions, he will reveal himself. Well, exactly that. He shows himself like a tiger that he described during the pre-election campaign. Remember the chicken joke, and then the Kremlin makes a great move. On the 5th, 3 days before the ultimatum expires, the Kremlin invites Witkoff to Moscow. Vitkov goes, he returns and later talks about his problem. He's an experienced developer, hasn't taken a translator or accompanying him from the embassy to write down what was said to him. He misunderstood what was said to him and how, so when he came here, he told Trump, unrevealed breakthrough. Russians are ready to liberate the so-called territory, to completely liberate Zaporizhzhia and Kherson Oblast, he says, if he is given the famous area of Donetsk in Donbass. After a while, Vitkov, or rather, he began to work back. And why work back? Because the Europeans came to the surprise. What nonsense! All the information we have in our foreign ministry, our intelligence services say nothing like this is happening in the Kremlin. This is nonsense, but Trump has already swallowed it. Yes, Vitkov recognized that. Yes, I've got a bit pissed off, I've overreached a bit, they aren't going to leave, but they agree that the world, including Ukraine, should not legally recognize Russia as the country of Zaporizhzhia and Kherson region. But Trump has already begun to swallow it, acting as if he doesn't hear all the amendments made on the air. He's already said that a very, very good proposal has come. And Putin offers to invite him to the meeting in Alaska. And there he went, as you remember. I've told you in detail what happened there. This time the Russians who were there, I mean Putin, Lavrov, Ushakov, fooled and stretched out one Vitkov's nose. Last time they did the same to Vitkov and to Trump. It just didn't work out with Rubio though. Trump and Vitkov understood. That question was hidden in the territories, saying they were still on their feet and that Ukraine would give everything, not leaving anywhere. But the question didn't work. There were questions to be answered, and we agreed, like with NATO's Article 5. Trump heard this, but Vitkov heard it. He didn't hear Rubio, but he was in the minority, and as one of my chiefs said, he was so corpulent and like Trump, a big head, he said, I've got more ass, so I'm smarter, as it was understood. In general, they built this Washington summit, discussing in detail this concept of security, then creating a group, an international one, where the defense ministers, advisors on national security, all countries, including Ukraine, were introduced. They're already working. They were supposed to complete the full plan of this concept, although only a day after the Washington conference. As you remember, Lavrov said everything they discussed was nonsense and we promised nothing of the sort. Everything remains the same. It was another back and forth, because Russia could have stopped, not allowed, if it was a mistake, as they say on the phone. Trump called Putin, he could have corrected him, but no, he didn't. In short, a back and forth, and now this lady Zakharova is returning. So the whole situation the other way. So what do we get from this operation carried out by Russia? First, the ultimatum, which was supposed to explode on August 8. Putin didn't agree to a ceasefire, but now Russia should have been under these, not Russia, but those buying Russian oil products, probably with 500% or 200% tariffs. There's nothing of the sort. Everything quieted down, non-existent. So 3 days before Trump's trip, day 5 or day 6 to Moscow, he was effectively at the crossroads in relation to these sanctions. What would happen if Putin didn't accept them? Putin wasn't going to accept them. And now what? He offended Trump. Putin didn't agree or announced any sanctions, so somehow this issue was fully played into play. Next, regarding security guarantees. This issue is also fully played into play. I don't know, poor representatives of European countries who have been working on this issue for a whole week don't know how they feel. They understood by the end of the week that everything they worked on was completely empty. And Russia now, yes, Russia also replaced the fact that the issue of a ceasefire was removed. Instead of that, Trump moved to Putin's concept of working peacemaking. Over peacemaking, any normal person works months or years, all that time. The Treaty on Reduction, or rather the destruction of all intermediate-range missiles in Europe, which was signed in 1987, worked 4 years for it. That's the perspective, and that's Putin's idea. He still believes he can win because his country is 15 times larger. He'll take Ukraine by storm. The question of guarantees under Article 5 flies away too. And we return to where Putin was, imposing ultimatums, or rather, moving out his demands, announcing aggression. We return to the night of February 24, 2022. Here's the full, so to speak, quintessence of what happened from August 5 to August 29, when Zakharova made this statement. Of course, the New York Post still works to discuss this topic, to understand the full depth of what happened. And not like Vitkov, not a professional, a developer who went there without a translator or a person from the embassy holding a stenogram and ending it this way. This episode caused disappointed. Vitkov couldn't handle it, gave wrong information. Some American officials, including Vitkov alone, were against the supply of counterinformation until Trump's administration was ready to draw a harder line against Putin. You understand the specifics. Trump was ready to break Putin's August 8th if he didn't accept this ultimatum. But then Vitkov appears and says, Mr. President, Putin is ready, he fears you, he's ready, that's it. That's how it is, gentlemen. In short, Vitkov is to blame, although recently there was a cabinet meeting on Saturday, I believe, the so-called cabinet, which lasted 3 hours in the White House. Probably 2 hours present, as the aristocracy pressurized Trump in all public places. And Vitkov was different. He threw him right in the face, saying, of course, he should get the Nobel Prize because Trump has done so much for the world. Nothing in the history of humanity has been done for the world. That's why it should be believed that he will continue his fruitful activity. And now, this was written by competent people, analysts of the Republican Party, high-ranking military like General Kin. I haven't heard a single 4-star general or even a 2-star general speaking publicly who was thrilled about what the administration was doing regarding Russia's aggression against Ukraine. And most of them, well, not most of them, they are all probably close to the Republican Party in tradition. And yet, this is the kind of dissatisfaction. So we're waiting. Lewitt in the White House apparently sensed that something had to be done. The pause lasted a while. A while ago, Trump said in a week and a half we'll discuss it. And now it ends somewhere at the junction of this week and a half. We are on the next week. We should expect an important, as Lewitt said, statement from Trump. Judging by these flurries, Lewitt himself on the first day, both countries are definitely to blame. Ukraine is to blame for, you remember how in the fairy tale, he is to blame for the fact that he wants to eat the wolf, right? And Ukraine is to blame for the fact that Russia is 15 times greater than it and therefore dare to fight for its existence. That is, the chaos continues, it is exacerbated, but I will give you 2 more such views, which I consider the main now among the most smart people of the Republican Party who worked in this administration even in the first term. Let's see what happens. In the meantime, the best analysts mind close to the Republican Party offer options of what needs to be done, what needs to be changed in this situation among them. Richard Hance is one of the most famous domestic political analysts close to the Republican Party, a well-known diplomat and an expert in foreign policy. He was the president of the International Relations Council until the summer of 2023. This already shows the caliber of this person. Before that, he worked as the director of planning politics in the U.S. State Department. One of the top, probably the second or third in the State Department. He worked for George Bush's administration, the younger one, and personally consulted with State Secretary Colin Powell, a mock Republican, you could say, but a short liberal, not an expert. He also held several key government positions, was a special aide to President George Bush the elderly, coordinator of U.S. politics toward Afghanistan, and all that. He was also a special ambassador to Northern Ireland, making significant contribution to the development of the peace process. Now he is also very active in expressing his views on various foreign issues. We must note that regarding peace in Ukraine, he was not an ardent pro-Ukrainian or an ardent anti-Russian. But here's what he writes for you to understand the evolution, the within of changes in the view, the mood, the circles. Well, I would say this, elites of the Republican Party, intellectual elites of the Republican Party, but first and foremost, a stone in the hearth of Republicans in the U.S. Congress. Many ask me, why is the Congress sitting there? Why is it silent? Here, what cause writes on this subject. I am disappointed with the Republicans in the Congress who could resist the current external political course of the White House, but they decided not to do that. I only know that these Republicans in the Congress, do not fulfill their constitutional duties as assigned in the article, and they do not fulfill every civilian's duty to put the country's interests above those of the party and themselves. He accuses them of doing mostly career-oriented things, sluggish, even though they try to hold their position, afraid to speak against, so as not to cause fire here, elections and so on, leather interests, and that's it. As a result, the concession and countermeasures system has stopped working. In fact, the Congress can simply stop using it now until November. It's like the fifth carton, as Classic once wrote, the fifth carton in Russia's self-government. Next, he analyzes what must be fought for, or rather, what must be fought for in the matter of ending aggression in Ukraine. And here we return, as I've said in the previous video, to the fact that Putin has managed to replace the demands of both Europeans and Ukraine. But here the United States provides decent analysts with the understanding that it's necessary to urge a ceasefire and use it to start a peace process. But he pays attention to this. He believes that a comprehensive peace treaty is unattainable now, so he struggles to emphasize the need for a ceasefire and immediately urge a ceasefire until it's not achieved and the war continues. He believes this is madness, just madness. So the message is, for achievement, as they say, an experienced diplomat of a higher strategic level, the situation must be achieved for it to be called strategic diplomatic trailer, that is, every idea must bear fruit. We return to the famous comparison from the movies, I think, Dead Seasons. If you bring 9 pregnant women together, the child doesn't give birth in a month. That's why he says, ceasefire is hard, but a desirable goal is needed, one that's more achievable and more real than immediately setting the goal of achieving a whole bluffing world. Honestly, it rarely happens that a side could put an end to the war simply by imposing another one on their own will. Take the second stone in the White House. It seems there are people who believe Ukraine should be suppressed and forced to take the position of Russia. Some people suspect that deep in Trump's heart there's a voice suggesting that maybe that's what it's supposed to do, but sometimes other people voice him. And the question is, what voice does he currently have in his heart, in his head, that is louder than the others? Has right, in practically all cases, it's necessary for the leadership to be present to resolve the conflict. He means, at least, the leaders who prefer peace over the continuation of combat actions. That's the first thing he needs to take on, take initiatives, negotiate with each other, or use delegations. And these leaders must be strong enough to push that idea through in the country. To force or convince the people to accept this idea, he needs to go to peace, because continuing the war is suicidal or pointless for the nation. Then he says none of the above, and first and foremost, obviously, when it comes to Russia and Putin. He probably is quite strong to convince his population of the need to stop the war, but he needs to explain why what he supposedly achieved, and as general Kin said, in 2 years, 1% of the territory, more than 1 million people were present. Many people will be found in Russia. They've already been there, they'll be back, I can hear them myself. This will be undesirable, and this is the most blurred bone, so to speak, in his electorate, in his social base, the Putin system. That's why his current goal is not so much to expand Ukraine's territory, as to see Ukraine as the independent, democratic country which has close ties with the West. He doesn't show any readiness for something less, that's it. Negotiations with him could last endless, and that fits him perfectly. And he convinced Trump of that. Also unclear, House writes, is there currently a process Russia could accept at all? What process it could accept? Accept full Ukrainian capitulation. In this regard, it is indicative that the Kremlin is creating obstacles for the meeting of Putin and the President of Ukraine, Zelensky. On the Ukrainian side, there are also its restrictions. Ukraine considers the ceasefire preferable compared to continuing the war, only if it does not require transferring any territory to Russia on a constant basis, I emphasize. De facto, there is a difference between de facto, the position of the territory, and de jure. The permanent peace between Russia and Ukraine would be preferable, but it simply remains unattainable. The administration, as it were, warns in advance. We all expect, since I started this, we all expect Trump's statement, and no one knows what he will say, so the experienced diplomat warns. Forcing Ukraine to surrender will be a retribution for Putin for his aggression, and possibly alarm other countries and regimes who have territorial ambitions to use their forces to achieve their goals. Moreover, negotiations on such a treaty will take months or years, which will lead to prolonged combat operations. As a rule, the scale of diplomatic ambitions cannot exceed the degree of alertness to the situation. Diplomatic ambitions, if their goal is to achieve peace now, they are useless. On the contrary, they are useless in terms of achieving a positive goal, and they are harmful because they serve the cause behind which, as General King said, Russia is fighting not so much on the battlefield as against the peaceful population of Ukraine. The author further writes, this conclusion emphasizes the need to return to the possibility of mediating to achieving a ceasefire, the approach that the United States used before Trump and Putin's summit in Alaska. That is, after these brilliant diplomatic successes of Trump in Alaska, and then at the Washington summit, where they forget about the ceasefire and move on to achieving peace. They need to go back. To achieve such a ceasefire, the author writes, two things are needed to increase pressure on Russia and their long-term responsibility towards Ukraine. In many ways, this can be achieved if Trump promises support from the Congress, if doubts will be established. If Trump promises unlimited volume, the intelligence agency must provide necessary military and intelligence aid to Ukraine in order to organize a stable defense and carry out attacks on targets deep in Russia's territory. Additional economic sanctions against Russia must also be imposed. Well, it's still hard to disagree with something. Further, some claim, the author writes, that Ukraine must be provided with security guarantees. Carefully approach this possibility. Ukraine has already been incited twice, despite the fact that it had security guarantees, received them in 1994, the Budapest summit. And here's the deal, instead of talking about security guarantees, it's necessary to give it maximum indirect aid, carry out weapons, provide all necessary intelligence, but do it how? It's being done now, in the US, in Europe, through Europe, into Ukraine, all of this goes. But not link events like deployment of military contingents or the promise to close, or an event to close the sky over Ukraine with the help of American or other NATO aircraft. He believes that aid in the field of security is more significant, more effective than guarantees for security, which seem they exist, like the Budapest Memorandum, when it comes time to implement them, but seem they don't. If I did not agree with him, I would tell you my position. You need one thing and another, full-scale aid as well as guarantees, as noted in Article 5. Moreover, if European countries have already agreed, what are the problems? They agreed not to deploy troops. They only need White House agreement as a backstop, which will guarantee security. That is, many people laugh at this, joke not only significantly with Ukraine, but also with other countries. First, the country or territory that needs to be protected is deployed by a small contingent of the United States. And then a large contingent is had to be placed to protect this small contingent, as well as here. So a small contingent is being deployed, a number of European countries, and then, finally, the United States will have to place or use its forces to deploy this European contingent to protect it. He acts against that. I believe he is acting pointlessly. Finally, if we can get Putin to understand only force, it would be necessary to demonstrate it real, with boots on the territory of an American serviceman or boot. Ukraine, currently Europe, will be limited to Afghanistan. Meanwhile, under Ukraine's request of 5 European members of the UN Security Council, Belgium, France, Denmark, Sweden, and Slovakia, the meeting with the UN Security Council will take place today, where the issue of barbaric bombing of cities of Ukraine, primarily Kiev, will take place. As a result, dozens of people died. It's noted that 2 representatives of Ukraine were supposed to meet on Friday with the Trump administration to discuss the ceasefire issue. According to some currently not entirely confirmed data, 2 of these representatives are current representatives of Ukraine at the UN and Yermak. So they supposedly met with Witkov already. I understand, for example, Ukraine's representative Melnik, a permanent diplomat, so they supposedly met with Witkov. He's the one who is currently being shot at, being accused of either being stupid because he's a useful Kremlin Idiot with different reasons, but he disinformed the presidents of the United States, he disinformed the entire Western world, resulting in the second effectively failurious meeting in Alaska. Then, the Washington summit, which was aimed at failure. As a result, we have returned to the situation that effectively existed before Russian aggression against Ukraine. That is, all Russian demands have remained in force, as Zakharov confirmed today. He is now accused of being the scapegoat in this story. 2 Ukrainian presidents meet with him. I do not understand the first question of this meeting. The second, I do not understand what Yermak has to do with it. Witkov is accused of being, to put it mildly, not a professional, but a developer. As for Yermak, it was the largest publication the United States in Europe wrote. It sounded like you remember the eve of Russian aggression when the White House, that is, the White House of Biden, first warned Ukrainian leaderships by diplomatic and intelligence channels that aggression should be prepared. Then they saw that the bank did not plan to prepare for refutation of aggression. Then they began shouting through mass media, saying, "Dream about aggression," and still didn't help. Now, a similar situation appears after discussions and spreading information to President Zelensky, saying, "Stop sending Yermak here." First diplomatic channels, intelligence channels, and then through the largest media outlets in Europe and the United States. Why not? Because he is incompetent, he doesn't understand the issues to be resolved and discussed, which he brings here. Moreover, he's a pooter, not a broken person who doesn't understand what life is like here and what rules are in Washington. A red rag, once again, brings him there. But I don't know, it's like Kharid, as the American publication wrote, no one has done much to worsen the outcome of decisions related to Ukraine's aid to the U.S. administration, like Yermak. Zelensky is being sent for the first time in 1,000 years to openly and inevitably resolve the issues he intends to resolve in the best-case scenario. So this is the Security Council, a bi-nation organization. In Copenhagen, Kai Kallos stated that the defense minister of 27 bloc countries will discuss strengthening sanctions against Russia and increased supply of Ukrainian army defense materials, as well as giving Europe post-war security guarantees that could include a training EU mission in Ukraine after the ceasefire. The Europeans, well done. I like this woman, this Politico Kallos. She's a brilliant diplomat. We are on the same wave, together with hands. As you can see, she doesn't just talk about peace. It's time to fight now, first of all, to resolve the issue of ceasefire. The Minister of Defense of Lithuania, David Shakalinia, also spoke, saying that hopes for peace are now naive. The same applies, understand. The Europeans understood. They are on the same wave as hands. And it's all effectively against the official course of Trump's administration, who is forced to support Ukrainian authorities, as well as, in any case, the leaders of the largest European state. In his words, gentlemen, this struggle, or what Putin is doing, is it really taking time? By buying it cheaply, time to kill more people and imitated some readiness, it's possible to stop one's own killings activity, just an imitation. And he started this thesis and Trump bought into it, and this must be worked out, gentlemen, the other way around. It stated that Europe must act more decisively against Russia, and specifically stated that it is time to confiscate frozen Russian assets but must upset Russia. Just a week ago, I spoke somewhere in Europe at some next meeting with the Prime Minister of Belgium, where most of the frozen money was held. I said this must not be done in any case, or there will be a catastrophe for the world financial Western system. And now, the conclusion of this video. There's still a lot to say about the situation, but I want to give you two official opinions on how it will end. The main question is, have they managed, after the Alaska meeting, to quickly gather, pull over to Washington and wake up the voices in Trump's mind? All of them have to achieve the same titanic goal. Russians are simply slapping them in the back, whether it's Putin himself or his representatives there, Zakharov, they are laughing at him. I take Zakharov's statement after Trump screamed at him about his great diplomatic successes in Alaska and then in Washington, and now what Zakharov is saying is just spitting Privok, not just in Trump but in the United States. Prestige falls to his face. Two views about him. We're on the border again. What to do? Life in Washington right now. First opinion, he and Dauber are former US representatives at NATO, an extremely smart man. His opinion, Trump will quake and then say, "So guys, I'm tired of you all. When you reach an understanding, I mean Putin and Zelensky, when you reach the point where you have to make peace. Call me, I'll sponsor you, or rather watch over you. For now, I have other important cases inside the country, abroad, at the gas station. The demands are troubling sometimes, and all that kind of stuff." This is one position, a bad position, or rather, an objective position, a bad scenario for events if, along with it, Trump stops military aid as well as intelligence aid. The latest actions of the administration, in particular, the supply of these missiles and RAM, say against this. Also, the fact that this administration was announced for the first time about these supplies. This is the first supply, the official announcement of this administration. Plus, part of these, I think, 850 million, the main part of the money will be given to Norway, Denmark, and another third of the countries, I think, Germany. And the fourth source of money will go to foreign sales program of weapons of the United States, so there will be money from the United States. This administration was first allocated, so there is hope. The move is made. This is already after Alaska, after the Washington summit, considering the situation. Let's hope. Let's consider it an indicator, a guiding light. Second opinion, my Ukrainian viewers know this name. He's a representative of Trump's first administration, a U.S. Representative Pryon. He was also a special ambassador to Ukraine, Ukraine's big friend who understands everything. Absolutely, I listen to him. He understands everything, understands brilliantly, and he's a very good diplomat and a professional who knows how to achieve diplomatic success.
Ну и вообще профессионал, который знает, как добиться дипломатическими.
So one of his statements regarding the situation has been a quote from Winston Churchill. Remember his saying, "Americans will always make the right decisions after trying everything again and sensing that everything is wrong." In his opinion, the administration has already exhausted the list of wrong decisions. There's nowhere to go, that's it. So according to him, there's only one decision left, and that's the right one. I also very much want to hope that that's exactly the case. Well, gentlemen, on this positive note, I would like to end today's video. As always, glory to Ukraine and the armed forces. The enemy will be defeated. Victory will be ours. To you, dear friends, I wish endurance, courage, and steadfast faith in our inevitable victory. Until we meet again.